You're listening to the 21-gun salute coming from that state visit. President of the Republic of Kenya, William Ruto, being visited by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's just bring in the SABC international editor, Sophie Mokoena, at this point to take us through what to expect for this particular visit. Sophie, how can we speak to the visuals we're seeing at this moment, looking very presidential?
Well, it's a 21-gun salute. Earlier on, we had the national anthem from both Kenya and South Africa, and now the two leaders will get in. What is important about this state visit is that Kenya is our largest trading partner in East Africa. You know, we have larger trading partners in the SADC region. And when you look at the regions on the continent, the second region where we have better relations and business, it's East Africa. And therefore, it's a gateway to East Africa. But secondly, you had when the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, was in South Africa, there were a number of bilaterals that were signed, including aviation, where SAA is expected to work with Kenyan Airways. And we are hoping that that kind of information will be better communicated today. The other thorny issue is that you have many Kenyans in South Africa, in different universities and institutions, who are sharing their skills and knowledge. Coming to South Africa is a difficult process, but with us South Africans, we can get into Kenyan Airways now. On arrival at Jomo Kenyatta, we will get our visa and we'll continue with a business or whatever we are there for. And therefore, the issue of visa is going to be high on the agenda.
So we're watching the footage now. We're watching President Cyril Ramaphosa there, just inspecting the military parade. This is very significant, Sophie. It's not something that always happens in state visits.
Yes, it's quite important. It speaks to how Kenya views South Africans. And two, it is a question of strengthening the relations, political and trade. Political, because there are a number of challenges on the continent. The issue of peace and security in the Great Lakes region. We saw South Africa hosting the warring factions from Ethiopia in Pretoria, and we had the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, our former deputy president, Pomp. Of course, those discussions chaired by former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo. So you can see, even at that level, we work together. You have a problem right now between Rwanda and DRC. South Africa was involved. Kenya is part of the East Africa, and it is not fingered in the conflict in the Great Lakes region. Therefore, they can share information, particularly because President William Ruto is still new and the president has been there. They can talk about that. But also remember, they come from COP27 in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, and they were talking about just energy transition and what the G7 countries must do.
I just wanted to allow that moment of silence, but let's bring in SABC international editor Sophie Mokoena once again. Sophie, the significance of the signing of that cessation of hostilities agreement, how does it place Kenya, being in East Africa, seeing that it's Southern Africa that has been able to successfully facilitate this process? I suppose with the inclusion of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, you can say Western Africa to some extent as well.
Yes, indeed. You know, South Africa since 1994 has been involved in bringing together countries where you have groups that are fighting. We saw it with the DRC as well. With the DRC, the long protracted Sun City talks. And again, this time around, South Africa did avail the facilities and the venue. Of course, Pomp was not recommended by South Africa, but she's part of the senior committee within the African Union that deals with issues on the continent, and she was part of those talks. Of course, Minister Naledi Pandor is a guarantor because the talks were in South Africa. But they are now back in Nairobi. As we speak, The generals and stakeholders at military are meeting in Nairobi, and former President Kenyatta is there.
Yeah.
I think these are some of the issues that President William Ruto will speak to President Cyril Ramaphosa about.
I want to ask you, and you mentioned this point at the beginning of the conversation, that this comes just, as the William Ruto's predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta, also came to South Africa. Just in terms of why William Ruto, coming into his presidentship, would choose to have a state visit by South Africa as one of his first state visits. Just how significant does it make South Africa in terms of the Southern Africa, Eastern Africa relations?
South Africa since 1994 has positioned itself as a voice of reason on the continent, and it's seen in most cases as a neutral player, not only in South Africa but internationally as well, because the South African foreign policy is anchored around peace, security and prosperity, because you can't achieve prosperity unless you have peace. And therefore, the countries on the continent see South Africa as a strategic partner, particularly during these critical times. Who can forget the role played by President Ramaphosa during the COVID-19 when he was chair of SADC, Troika organ and politics, but also at the AU level. And so any leader would want to have audience with South Africa. South Africa as well would want to have audience with strategic countries on the continent, so that whatever the views of South Africa are understood. You know that as we speak, Kenya is the non-permanent member in the Security Council of the United Nations. Now that issue of the war in Ukraine, Kenya can almost be our voice on the continent, but we hold a bit of not so converging views on how to handle the war in Ukraine. We know that the ambassador of Kenya has been very outright condemning and talking about Russia, but we have taken a neutral stance. Some of those issues will come up during the discussion.
So the presidency says the president will be signing a few instruments while he's there. Just in terms of their program for the day, what can we expect, Sophie?
Yeah, after this, they will sign those agreements, and after signing those agreements, they will meet business later in the afternoon.